Okay, well, I entitled this little talk Memoirs of a Hybrid, because I'm a retired Church of England minister, retired in 2019, but I'm a hybrid because I was in paid ministry for 18 years, but a primary school teacher for 22 years. But I kind of alternated. I did several years primary school teaching, then several years ordained, and then back to primary school teaching, and then finished up the last 9 years in paid ordained ministry. I remember early on in my teaching career, I was out on playground duty, and one lad in my class was a born comedian, and there was a bit of rustling behind me, and suddenly Ed, his name was, Edward England his name was, jumped out in front of me with a red folder under his arm, and in his best Eamon Andrews voice said, "Mr. Chamberlain, you think you're on playground duty, but today, this is your life." So this is a little bit my life. There's a DVD Christian Basics course called Start, which you've not seen. I recommend it to you. And in the opening programme, the two presenters are on Blackpool Beach. And in the sand, they draw a timeline of their life from their younger years all the way up. And they charted on this timeline all the ups and downs in their life. And then trying to identify where God had been in their life. And of course they realised that there are often occasions when they look back, they'd gone through a situation, didn't realise that God had been present, but only as they look back they realised actually God was there in that situation, even though I wasn't aware of him. So my story is nothing special at all. Well, as I tell it, maybe you can mentally chart your own life journey and maybe have a look and think, well, where's God been in my life story? We aren't on Blackpool Beach this morning, and to give my story a little pizzazz, I've got a few visual aids, and my visual aids are Leicester City shirts. I've been a Leicester fan for many, many years. In fact, I think when I get to the pearly gates I might be in trouble, because when I was a teacher, all the kids I've taught, have they learned very much? Not very sure. And all the churches I've been involved in, have I seen lots come to the Lord? Not very sure. But all of them, kids and congregations, all know about Leicester City. So, as you will, might be hung for a sheep as for a lamb. Here goes. So, I will begin with the 1960s. Wow. The early years. Whoops. The early years. I grew up in a mining village in South Derbyshire. I say mining village, but actually it was just a street of national coal board houses tacked onto the end of a village. It was a street with quite a bit of a reputation. If you said, I come from Coton Park, people would take a step back. And I love that bit in John when Nathaniel says, can anything good come out of Nazareth? I think, well, Jesus maybe came from a place a bit like Coton Park. My parents weren't churchgoers. They forced me and my brother to go to Sunday school, and by secondary school there were only 3 of us lads left who were still involved in church. When I was about 13, I was invited by the curate to go on a Christian camp for rough kids in the Lake District. And as part of that camp, the Christian faith was told very simply. And I had always thought you could never call yourself a Christian. It was arrogant to say, I'm a Christian, because who could live up to the standards of Christ? And it was simply taught to us that being Christian was asking Jesus Christ into your life and having a friendship and a relationship with him, and the lifestyle followed on from that. And so I did that. I asked Jesus Christ into my life, and I knew I returned from that camp in the Lake District different, a Christian. I knew from that point I was a Christian. And the local clergy, when I got home, gave me this little book, which I waved in front of St Michael's a few weeks ago, called Christian Certainty by Frederick P. Wood. And you can tell how old it is. It says on the front, 1 shilling and 6pence. And yeah, and that was really where my Christian faith began. I was the only teenager going to our little village church, and I was a bit scared to let on to my mates at school that I was a Christian. So I really lived my adolescent years as a bit of a secret disciple. But even from the word go, I had a kind of inkling that one day I might become a vicar. When I met my wife to be at Teacher Training College, I warned her that that might be happening, but she still decided to take me on. So, we finished teacher training, we got our first teacher jobs, and I returned to my home village. And my next bit, after the early years, I've got, just in case you fall asleep, the Lineker years. The Lineker years. When I was teaching, I thought, with this, bit of a bee in my bonnet about in a vicar, that I would maybe become a lay reader and do that for a bit and then think about going into ordained ministry. But we had a vicar who, to put it mildly, was a bit of an authoritarian. Before he came, we had, for the parish magazine, an editorial committee. We used to review the previous magazine and suggest articles and compile it all, and it was quite a decent magazine. He arrived and he decided he would sack the editorial committee, and the editorial committee became the magazine of stapling together the pages which he had written in its entirety. So soon, as you might imagine, we all sort of said, well, you've written it, you staple it. So I just thought, well, there's no chance of being a reader with this guy, so I thought, well, I'll just continue to serve the Lord as best as I can, Sunday school, youth work, and being a teacher. But at the same time, the local Methodist church asked me and my wife, who's musical, mostly because of her, if we'd do a service, because they'd got a gap. So they'd have nobody to play the piano, and they kind of had me as, come along with your wife and maybe you can do the service. So she played the piano, and I sort of very hesitantly led and preached at the service. Not long after that, a booklet dropped through the letterbox in the post, which was the local Methodist circuit plan with all the chapels and all the services. And in the back cover, under the list of visiting preachers, was my name, address, and phone number. So the Anglican doors shut, but the Methodist doors opened, and the poor Methodist chapels had to experience me in my first fumbling attempts to lead and to preach. All this time I was wondering, where's this lightning bolt going to come? And this big voice is going to say, Roger, you must be a vicar. It hadn't happened. But I think one thing about God's call and testing God's call is if it's persistent. And this idea of being a vicar still carried on. I got to the stage in primary education where I was going for deputy headships, and I remember distinctly one interview and thinking, actually I don't really want this job, and when I'm 40 I can far easily see myself as a vicar than as a primary head teacher. So I decided, well, I better test this out and put myself forward. I remember a sermon that we had once about when Joshua and the people crossed into the promised land, and the priests had to step into the River Jordan before it divided. It didn't divide first, they had to put their feet into the cold water before anything happened. And I thought, yeah, that's maybe what I've got to do. I've got to step into this cold water and see if God really was calling me into the ministry. Amazingly, and quite scarily for me actually, the doors opened very rapidly. I remember going to the selection conference, frightened out of my wits because our first daughter had just been born, and I was thinking, well, you've got a lovely little girl, you're in a school where everybody loves you. I thought, well, maybe on this selection conference I'll say all the wrong things and I'll get out of it, but that didn't happen. Trained in Bristol, did first curacy in Plymouth, and moved to Birmingham in 1990, where I was in a second curacy and responsible for a daughter church. Then in 1994 I became an incumbent of a parish in a urban area, and that became very, very tough indeed. Huge problems in the church, financially, relationship wise. The actual environment was actually dangerous. Vicarages are often the front line in terms of professionals living in a parish, and we certainly felt ourselves on the front line where all sorts of strange and frightening things were happening. Once there was our daughter came down from upstairs. She was about 10, I think, at the time, and she said, "Somebody's just run across the garden, jumped over the fence." And no sooner were the words out of her mouth, there was a ring on the doorbell, and I opened the front door, and there's all these police with dogs and a helicopter overhead. Said, "Can we come through the vicarage?" So, and they were chasing somebody back to with drugs or anything like that, and it just became more and more difficult. And this was the Martin O'Neill years. So I was in a real quandary at this stage, because it wasn't a safe place for my children. I wasn't happy at all. I felt there was a complete mismatch between what I was trying to offer and what the parish needed. And because the children moved schools a lot, I didn't want to uproot them again and move to another parish. So partly because of that, and partly to lick my wounds, I said I'm going to go back into teaching, resume my teaching career. So that's what I did. I managed to return to teaching. There were many challenges because I've been out of education for a long time. When I left primary school education, there was no national curriculum. When I returned to primary education, there it was. The school I went to was being offsetted. They were under the dreaded special measures. My plan was I would do a bit of teaching, lick my wounds, get the kids settled, and then I would return to parish ministry as somebody's curate. But strangely, all the doors back into parish ministry seemed to close, and all the doors in primary education seemed to open. So I got successive promotions and all sorts of things. And it really made me think, as I continued a sort of a non-stipendiary ministry, but also full-time as a teacher, about vocations. It took me a long time to realise, particularly as doors shut in parish ministry and doors opened in primary school, that actually teaching was a ministry, and that, you know, ordinary work is a ministry. That there isn't this sort of, sometimes spiritually, that this idea that, you know, the real shock troops of the Christian life are missionaries, and then the clergy, and then folks who do an ordinary job, well, they're just kind of pawns and foot soldiers. And it took me a long time for the penny to drop that that's not the case. That's the case. Somebody said that life is more like a peach than an orange. That we should think of life like a peach, because there's a stone in the middle, the presence of God, and outside all the fruit is undivided. We can tend to think of life like an orange. An orange is all in segments. We can compartmentalise life. So that's the spiritual bit, that's my work life bit, that's the other bit, and keep all these bits separate, when God is part of all of our life, like the stone in the middle of the peach. And it occurred to me that, you know, that there aren't many sermons in church about daily life and daily work and equipping you. And it seems to me, and it's probably still the case, that actually the energy seems to be, you know, you're, you know, working away at your job, and the church says, oh yeah, but we need you to do this, that, and the other in the church. So the energy is pulling you from your work back into church to go and do all this churchy stuff. where actually the energy should go the other way. The church should be saying, we are equipping you to be a Christian in your Monday to Friday daily life. And that to me seemed to be a lesson to be learned of churches today. So I continued in primary education, became a deputy head, but that deputy headship was in a very difficult school. I'd only been in there for about a week, and I thought, this is going to be difficult. The children and the parents were lovely, but there were huge problems with the staff. There was a very small clique of staff and a very poor and very uncommunicative, erratic head. And me as deputy was kind of in the middle. The head didn't help me to be deputy at all, and eventually, after a year, she left. So there was I with this group of people who rarely spoke to me, trying to be a deputy of the school. I spent much of my time kind of firefighting. I'd be down there early. The phone would be ringing any time from 7:30 to 8, saying I can't come in today, can you get cover, and covering my own class as well. And I tried desperately to get out of that situation. Every single interview advert going, I applied for it. I went to interview after interview after interview after interview with no success. And one summer, my wife and I went down to some friends in Morton in the Marsh, and they had a mission at that time. They had a big marquee out in the village as part of their mission, and so they didn't have a church and the service in the church. The service was in the marquee, and we sat down, and the theme of the service was all about Jonah. And my wife, very helpfully, they do these things right, she leaned to me in the middle of the service. She said, Roger said, that school is your Nineveh. You're trying to escape. And God wants you to stay there. And actually, I ended up staying there for over 4 years. And it, again, in terms of God's guidance, it can be about persistence. It can also be about, sometimes God doesn't change our circumstances. He changes our ability and our attitude within to cope with those circumstances. So, those years I call the kind of in the doldrums years. It kind of half coincided with some very indifferent years of Leicester City being in the old Division 2, the Championship, and eventually, tragically, disastrously, their relegation to League 2, to the old Division 3 as it used to be. And this dreadful Tops Tile shirt was the shirt they had for that year. But praise the Lord, they did get promoted very quickly, so we didn't have too many luxury trips down to Cheltenham away and such like. Eventually I did move on from that school and got a job as an assistant head and acting head for a time, and carry on in teaching. But then in, must have been sort of 2008, 2009, I realised that actually I could take early retirement from teaching, that I could manage it financially, and maybe explore again to see if I could get my feet wet and the Jordan would open, and see if the doors would open back into parish ministry. And that happened, and it was a bit like the season where Leicester City had the Great Escape. 2014, 2015, they were rock bottom of the league. Everybody said they were sure to be relegated. Then they had this amazing run of results, and they survived in the Premiership. A fantastic year that was. And the Great Escape for me was also a wonderful year, because the parish I went to was kind of everything I originally dreamed that parish ministry would be like. It was 2 small villages, and very nice to be the local vicar. Interesting in that it was 2 rural parishes, and I had this strong feeling that in a rural parish everybody believes they're part of the church whether they come or not, whereas I think in urban situations people are only part of the church if they've actually discreetly opted in. So there's that little bit of, different relationships. There were lots of family links through weddings and confirmations and funerals, and it was really a good time. And of course, being a wonderful time, it also confided with that wonderful years when Leicester City won the Premiership, when they were the champions. And 15-16, yeah. And so those years from 2010 to 2019 were like the championship years for me back in parish. One of my favourite things, and I've said this to some of you before, was when it was announced I was going to retire, there was a lady in the congregation who had been coming for quite a while. It was one of those stories where I'd done her father's funeral, and then she had a relationship with a guy who had been divorced, and he was coming along with her, and she said, will you do our wedding? So I'd done their wedding as well. And then when it was announced that I was retiring, Roger said, I've never been confirmed, or baptised. Can you do me before you go? And actually she was confirmed at St Alphege, which was lovely. But there was one time I was sitting with her, and I said to her, have you told the people at work, about being confirmed? And she said, yeah. She said, some people at church said, oh, have you found God then? And she said, this is what I said to him, no, God has found me. How wonderful that was. Wonderful. So, finally, we're on the last chapter. Here we are. Not an auspicious shirt because we've gone down. Shortly to return again. But I retired in 2019 and found myself in the leafy suburbs of Solihull, assisting at St Michael's, St Helens, and occasionally at St Alphege when they're really desperate. And as well as helping out in parish ministry, I also work as something called a spiritual director, more called a spiritual accompanier now, because director sounds you're telling people what to do. And it's really time to sit down. I've got about 6 folk. I'd sit down one-to-one, and we just talk about what is God doing in a person's life, and reflecting on where God might be in that person's life. And it underlines, as I was saying at the beginning, the importance of recognising where God is in your daily life. How does God make himself known to you? If God wanted to say something to you, would you be tuned in? Would you notice? I once thought about, if God went to a football match, what would he do? And spiritually, how do we picture God in our lives in compared to God in a football match? So where is God? Is he sitting up in the stands or in the commentary box just observing what's going on? Is he the coach and manager sitting in the dugout sort of roaring you on from the sidelines? Is he a ref on the pitch? Cases, well, you've done it again, Roger. Yellow card for that bit of language. Red card for that, what you said to your dear wife. Is he the ref? Well, actually, I think no. I think God is like the captain of the team. The incarnation of God in Christ means he's there on the pitch of life with us, encouraging us, getting into the tackles with us, and maybe helping us to score the goals. So thank you for not falling asleep. Mr. Chamberlain, this is your life. I have to tell you, with the shirts thing, is that in December I will be 70. I don't look it, right? And August, my daughter, who's equally fanatic at Leicester City, it must be something in the genes, she'll be 40 in August. So we've just splashed out on the new this season shirts. And on the back, mine's got Dad 70, and on the back of hers is Jen, because she's Jennifer, Jen 40. So we'll be wearing those with pride.
Thank you, Roger, very much for sharing your story. And we did think Leicester City would get a bit of a mention in that story. And we do pray for promotion for you for next year.
I'm very thinking getting up next year.
Thank you very much indeed, Roger. And you have clapped him twice, but let's clap him a third time, shall we? Thank you very much. We have got another breakfast already fixed. We're actually getting a bit more organised. So, right, I think Andy's already told you, on the 23rd of September we've got a speaker from CAP, which is Christians Against Poverty. We did have somebody from CAP come a long time ago, so he's going to come and give us an update. Particularly interesting, obviously, in the present economic climate, to hear what they're doing. It's very much, as the name implies, very much a Christian group. So do come and write that to your diary, and do come and bring friends along too. So thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming all. Thank you.